Hello and welcome to Summer Science Live. My name is Roma Agrawal and I'm a structural engineer and author. I'm really excited to be here at the Royal Society Summer Science Exhibition. Every year at Summer Science, we get to explore some of the strangest and most mind-blowing research from the UK and around the world. And this year is no exception. We have volcano detectives, a Mars rover on a mission, and a little tropical fish that could hold the key to better mental health. If you've never heard of the Royal Society, it's the UK's National Science Academy, and it's very old. In fact, it's so old that back when it started in the 1660s, science was a little bit different, investigating everything from unicorn horns to talking statues and mice falling in the sky in Iceland. If that sounds like your cup of tea, stay tuned, because we're going to take a trip down into the Society's labyrinthine archive a little later on. But at the Royal Society, we're not just interested in the past, we're also looking to the future. Over the next 3 hours, we'll be bringing you all the latest cutting-edge science from the exhibition floor, as well as some very special guests, such as Britain's first astronaut, Helen Sharman, and Michelle Doherty, who's leading an unmanned mission to the icy moons of Jupiter. It's a lot to cover, and I won't be doing it alone. Neuroscientist and pyrotechnician Fran Scott is going to be my roving reporter. She will be down on the exhibition floor doing all the mucky and dangerous things so I can relax in my comfortable chair. Hi Fran, how are you doing?
Hello, Roma. I am outside the Royal Society, where people have been flooding in all morning. So let's join them and head inside. This is the Summer Science Exhibition floor. My word, there is so much going on here. There's even someone dressed as a Brussels sprout. And I can't wait to meet the scientists and get hands-on with all the weird and wonderful activities that are going on.
Thanks, Fran. Remember, while you're here, you can subscribe to the Royal Society's YouTube channel. You can also follow us on social media at Royal Society. If you'd like to tweet throughout the show, please use the hashtag SummerScience. Now, if you live here in London, you might feel reasonably safe from volcanoes. In fact, the closest ones are in Italy and in Iceland. There's an ancient volcano 80 miles away in Cambridgeshire, but it's considered extinct. So don't bother trying to toast any marshmallows. But live volcanoes can be devastating. So scientists are doing everything they can to understand them better. Fran's going to find out more down on the exhibition floor.
If you know me, you will know that I have an above average interest in fire. So I was really drawn to this stand first, all about volcanoes. And I'm here with Mikhail Camino Harry from the University of Oxford, who can explain a little bit more about this disco floor that we've got. It's not a disco floor, is it?
It's not. So this is an Imaginarium.
Of course it is.
So it shows you a cross-section to the crust beneath a volcano in the Eastern Caribbean.
Nice.
The island is St. Vincent. And beneath the surface, we have different magma reservoirs.
Yeah.
So we can imagine we have a deeper reservoir in purple.
So the purple bit right here is the magma that's
very deep.
Yeah.
And then we have a mid-crustal reservoir in red, and then a shallower reservoir in orange.
Got you.
And then you have some electric activity.
And that's the flashing that you can see, yeah.
Right, and this creates, well, these fractures create earthquakes and connect these different reservoirs of magma. And then as they connect, you can see that they coalesce. So now you have purple joining the red. And then the red makes its way to the surface as you have more connections beneath.
I think an eruption's coming, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
And then with more earthquakes, eventually you have an eruption. And that's the sound you're hearing there. So it's kind of like a schematic of how you will have unrest going into eruption.
That is brilliant. And is this a simulation of an eruption that's happened,
Yes.
you said?
So in 2020, La Soufrière in St. Vincent erupted. It started with 3 months of dome forming activity and then transitioned to explosions afterwards. We can
Understood.
also look at this in terms of bird's eye view, aerial of the
Nice,
island.
yeah, so we're looking
So
down.
this is the island of St. Vincent, let's imagine.
And can I stand on
You
this?
can.
'Cause it's so inviting. So if I stand here,
Yes.
I understand that you are going to do things to this and I have to stand where it's safe, right?
Exactly. So you can imagine this is the island, and you have to decide as a resident where's the best place to
Of course,
to build your
because
life.
you're making it into a game, but it is quite serious stuff.
Yes.
This is serious science that's happening about volcanoes. Lives are at risk. Decisions need to be made.
Yes.
And so using this information, but doing it in this way lets people understand it.
Yes, exactly.
Absolutely.
So you have this island, and you decided to set yourself
I'm
up
going to
here.
be here for now. I might move closer. I'll see where the eruption happens.
So then this is where the volcano is,
Oh, okay.
right? Then you have some earthquakes related to the volcano, and then you have some gases. So far you're in a good spot because
So
the
yellow is
gases-
gas.
Yes, this is a
and
gas.
the flashing is like the earthquakes, the
Earthquakes
unrest.
happening around.
I don't know if I'm going to be safe. Let's see.
Now you have some pyroclastic flows going
Right.
that way, and then you have the ash cloud going this way.
Pyroclastic flows being like lava flowing
It's
over
like
the...
superheated gas
Oh, gosh.
that moves at a very high speed, and it kills things
Yeah,
instantly.
which is serious stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, so far you've
I've chosen, yeah.
but
Chosen-
things don't always happen this way, but so far. And then as activity progresses, we see more activity happening this way.
What does yellow mean?
So yellow means we might have some lahars coming this way, so when water interacts with ash,
So I should probably evacuate, right?
yeah.
I'm going to go over here.
So of course that's where scientists become important, because they will warn you before. that
Absolutely,
you're not
because you can't
moving in the right-
necessarily cross over that because it might be a danger zone.
Yeah, so this is how the game becomes interactive, and this is how you can get an idea of what it's like for people living on volcanic islands.
Gosh, thank you so much. And yes, this is a game, but even though I'm stood here on a simulation, it is quite nerve-wracking, and I suppose it puts it into perspective, the important work the scientists are doing, and then people like Mikhail that are making it really understandable for the next generation. But it's still a lot of fun to play, but back to you, Roma.
Nice work, Fran. Now, to tell us more, I'm thrilled to be joined by Richie Robertson, a volcanologist from the University of the West Indies. Welcome to Summer Science Live, Richie. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Could you tell us a little bit about how you got interested in volcanoes and what led you to the career that you've been following?
It's actually a long story, but I'll make it short. I'm from the island of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I'm from the island of St. Vincent. And in 1979, the volcano exploded. It had an eruption. At the time, I was in secondary school. I was in sixth form. And the eruption was so impactful. We woke up early in the morning, the volcano was erupting, and I just happened to be the person that went with my father towards the volcano to evacuate my grandmother. So the impact of the eruption, the spectacular nature of it, and then finally the fact that when the scientists came in to monitor the volcano to tell us what was happening, I realized that all of the scientists were coming from outside of the island, and there wasn't any Vincentian who knew about the volcano. And I took it upon myself, crazily, that I would become that person. And that is where I am now.
That's amazing. And how long have you been doing this as your career now?
Well, I've been doing it since 1987, I guess, officially. So, it's so long I could stop counting the years. But interestingly, one of the things that have happened is that the volcano had an eruption in 2020, 2021, and I was able to come full circle and be the person involved in providing that scientific guidance to the government and people of St. Vincent.
So do you think, is that your favorite volcano or is it your least favorite volcano, I guess, in a way?
I guess in terms of how it looks, I think it's really a majestic mountain. In terms of systems, I guess it's my favorite, it's one of the favorite ones, but there are 19 volcanoes that we monitor in the region. So, lots of volcanoes in Dominica and a couple of the islands are just as interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and what makes a volcanic system interesting to you?
Well, I guess it's a combination of things. I'm particularly interested in trying to ensure that people can live safely in volcanoes. So I think if a volcanic system is one which has vulnerable people close by, I'm particularly interested in trying to understand it better so that we could provide the guidance needed to get people out of the way in case of harm.
I think for a lot of us, when we think of volcanoes exploding, it's what we've seen in Hollywood films. But could you tell us a little bit more about what the explosions or the eruptions actually look like?
Well, the volcanoes in regions like in the Caribbean, which are subduction volcanoes, are ones that tend to explode. So that when the magma, this molten rock, comes to the surface, it breaks up into pieces and it has these big explosions that then send a lot of fine-grained material and coarser-grained material up into the air. Those are the spectacular ones that people are, when people think of a volcanic eruption, they think of an explosion. But there are volcanoes like in Hawaii, like in Iceland, where you have some things there, the magma is not as explosive and it comes out as this sort of really red flowing mass of rock that people could then sit down in the chairs and look at safely. The ones that are dangerous are the explosive ones.
Yeah, no, I mean, I always think of there's a certain amount of beauty to the magma, isn't there? Maybe how close have you been to magma, and what has that experience been like for you?
Perhaps in hindsight, in my early part of my career, a bit too close.
You've been too close.
But yeah, I've been in the days of the Montserrat eruption. We were quite close because there's a certain amount of uncertainty and ignorance in terms of what we were doing, and we were trying to collect data. Depending on the kind of magma that is coming out, if it's more basalt, it tends to be more runny and it's probably safer to get close to it. But it's still quite hot, so you really should not get within a few feet of it because even as you get close, you can
kind of feel this heat coming off.
If it's one of the volcanoes like in our part of the region, subduction zone volcanoes, which are explosive, you should stay several miles away from it because those could produce things that can cause you great harm quite quickly.
Yeah. I was really interested in what you said about scientists coming in from the outside. Can you tell us a little bit about the knowledge that the local people would hold about a volcano that external scientists might not?
Well, especially indigenous people, if you bear in mind that they've been the longest lived people in a particular region, they would have a lot of knowledge of past eruptions. And what we know from volcanoes is that the way in which they erupt in the past, often they erupt in a similar way in the future. So if you discount that knowledge, you discount a lot of the experiential knowledge that you could have that could inform us. So yes, the people who live on volcanic islands have a lot of experience dealing with volcanic eruptions, both in terms of how you can respond sensibly, as well as the bad things that can happen. So one of the things that we try to do is try to get into that knowledge, try to learn as much as possible, not only from the rocks itself, which is important, but also from the people who live on the islands.
Yeah, so I mean, it is really important, I think, to listen to the local people. Do you have any examples of when things have gone wrong, when that hasn't been done?
Yes, I do, and to do that, I'll have to go back to my favorite volcano, as I mentioned before, which is La Soufrière volcano in St. Vincent. In 1902, it had an explosive eruption. And one of the things from looking at the past history we know is that there were some fisherwomen, some women who got fish from one side of the island, went up the volcano, came down to another village, and they sold the fish there. And what happened is that earlier on in the eruption, there was indication that the volcano was about to erupt, and they noticed these changes. And when they went to the village that they were selling in, they tried to alert the people in Georgetown. They even went to the police station and told them, and they were, in fact, one of them was almost arrested because they told them they were being nuisances, so they went back. And the people in that village only realized what was happening when someone who was a plantation owner went up and saw it. But by then it was too late because the eruption had started and people actually ended up dying. And that's one of the reasons why in our exhibit, we're focusing on what we say learning from the past. There's a section about curating crises, sort of looking at past crises, and we're exhibiting some of what we have learned from these past crises. Because for us, geology, the past is a key to the future, not only in the rocks, but in terms of the history from people. And we're trying to learn from these hidden voices, these fisherwomen that you would never see in the records, trying to learn from what their experience was to tell us what could happen in the future.
So, I mean, the moral of the story is listen to women. That's what I'm going to take away from this.
Yes, listen to everyone, especially women.
Especially women. Thank you so much, Richie. It's been really great to chat to you. Now, from the explosive surface of our own planet to the rocky landscape of another world. Over to you, Fran.
That is right, Roma. I am actually here on Mars, if you couldn't tell, but I am not alone, don't worry. I have some guides here. I've got Samit Mahajan and Hiroki Cook from University of Southampton. So why have we got a slice of Mars right here, Samit?
Well, we've got a slice of Mars to actually explain the technology which we're developing this part of Enlighten Us program, a large collaboration between Nottingham, Edinburgh and Southampton, which is using a technology called Raman spectroscopy. And Raman spectroscopy, in Raman spectroscopy, you shine a laser on a material and the molecules in the material start vibrate. And when they vibrate, they give off different colors. By recognizing the different colors, which is actually the chemical fingerprint, you can tell what the constitution of those chemicals are, whether they constitute might be life or they might be disease, which I'm going to talk about later.
Brilliant. And this is new technology, isn't it, with the laser, and then like sort of looking at different chemicals and going, okay, that one's made of this one's made of B, C, D, and E, and this one's made of that.
That's correct. And NASA recognized this technology. It's actually an old technology, but reinvented because advancements in lasers, advancements in detection, and so on. But NASA recognized the importance of it, and that's why they have it on their rover, currently looking for signs of life on planet Mars.
So could we drive your rover?
You can, absolutely. Actually, the big rover is a replica of their rover, but we have a smaller one to play a game with.
This one little here. Okay, I'm up for games. Hiroki, I've heard you've got a button to press down
I'll show you
here.
that. So the real rover, we'll point out just before we play the game, is modeled after Mars Perseverance using the same Raman technology that is in SuperCam and in Charlotte. This was built by our interdisciplinary team, so scientists from different disciplines came together, so physicists, chemists, biologists, mathematicians, computer scientists, to build this rover very similar to the NASA engineers who put together the real thing 140 million miles away. So the real thing.
This is smaller than the one that's on Mars, or is it the same size?
The real one is the size of a hatchback car.
Okay, yeah.
So today, we'll drive an even smaller one, because the big one's asleep at the moment, but you'll be able to go to each of these targets as it flashes around, and we'll see if we fire our laser, look at our chemical fingerprint with Raman spectroscopy, and see whether life there exists.
Brilliant. And this is the controller
That's
here,
it.
right?
So
do you trust me?
I trust
Oh, you might regret that.
Drive the rover around, hit that button, and we'll see whether there's life. We'll look at the
Okay.
chemical fingerprint and see there's life. Okay, so we'll start the game.
Oh,
We'll
so the
see-
lights move.
Yeah,
All
we're
right.
gonna see
I thought I had
where
it
we're gonna go
easy with
first.
that
No,
one.
no. Oh, it was that one.
Oh,
There we go.
good. Okay. Oh,
Very good, very good.
go on. Oh, no, too much. Let's wait. Oh.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah. Line up just a little bit more.
Oh, no. So close. Oh, back.
Very good. Yeah, that's it.
Straight ahead.
Press the button.
Yes.
Press the red button.
Yes.
Oh, and it's, yeah.
And it brings up the chemical
There's the chemical fingerprint.
And this is this Raman spectroscopy.
Raman spectroscopy giving us a unique identifier, telling us whether there's evidence of past microbial life.
Brilliant. And then you're using this to sort of draw on people's imaginations and entice them in. But the research that you're doing is over here, isn't it, Samir?
Absolutely,
Thank
absolutely.
You. So what?
So this chemical fingerprint acquisition, as you just saw, which can happen on Mars, which is happening right now, actually we use that research, we use that idea to diagnose diseases much earlier than actually they manifest themselves. So we're looking at diseases like osteoarthritis, and you see that there are different fingerprints. This is how the fingerprints look like. These peaks correspond to the vibrations, and a spectrum corresponds to the chemical fingerprint.
That is absolutely fascinating. So you can use the same technology that they're using with the Mars rover to then analyze the chemical fingerprint of within bones when it comes to osteoarthritis to detect the disease before the person that has it might even know.
That's exactly correct. And you see, as you can then do a library comparison with a database. And this is not the only application. That's the fantastic thing about it. Actually, you can apply this on other diseases. We are trying to do it in skin cancer, melanoma detection, but it could be applied to neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and so on and so forth. So it's really a fundamental discovery, and which is having a large impact both in outer space, but also can make a real difference to the lives of people on planet Earth.
Absolutely, it's a tool that you can use in many different ways. And to tell us more about this research, I know, Roma, you have a guest with you right now.
Fran, it looks like you're having a bit too much fun there, so thank you. I'm now delighted to be joined by Amanda Wright from Nottingham to tell us more. Amanda, welcome to the sofa, as it were. Can you tell us a bit about the project that you're working on?
Yeah. So it's a large project that spans 3 different universities. So I'm from Nottingham University, as you said, and I've got some colleagues at Southampton and Edinburgh University who are also involved. And we're a big multidisciplinary team. There's biologists involved, clinicians, computer scientists, engineers, chemists. So we span a really wide range of disciplines, and we're all trying to take on quite a big challenge of trying to image deep inside the human body. So that's the challenge that we're trying to tackle at the moment.
And that's a technology that's also used to look for life in outer space, like 320 million miles away. So can you tell me a bit about that link?
Yeah. So some of the technologies we're using are linked to also what's happening on Mars at the moment. So there's a technology called Raman spectroscopy, and that's being used on the Mars rover to try to identify life on Mars, which is very exciting. And we're using it to try to identify different molecules that are present in the body. So using it, we can identify if somebody's got arthritis, if a tissue is cancerous, if not cancerous, and it's all using that same technology.
Now, the word spectrum is associated with light for me. So can you talk us through what spectrum means to you, and then what Raman spectroscopy means?
Yeah, sure. So you're right. We use a lot of different technologies involving light. So with Raman spectroscopy, you illuminate your sort of material of interest that you're trying to identify with a single wavelength or a single colour using a laser. And that laser, all the individual molecules inside the material get excited by that laser and vibrate at different frequencies. And depending on the frequency they're vibrating at, they change the colour of the light. So essentially we put one colour in and we look at all the different colours that come back from that material. And all those colours give us a kind of fingerprint or a spectra of what is present in that material. So we can use it to identify at the molecular level what molecules are in a material. So on Mars, they use it to say, is carbon present, and therefore is life present in this material we're looking at? And we use it to look at the human body to say, is there signatures of cancer here, or is there signatures of arthritis? What's going on?
So can you tell me a little bit about maybe how a cancer cell would respond differently than a healthy cell to this particular technique?
So it's all about the different molecules that are there and that are involved, and how those molecules vibrate. So it lets us identify the different molecules that are present and how they're vibrating in the case of cancerous and healthy tissue, for example. So for joints, we've got some people on the project who are very interested in arthritis, and a signature there is how much collagen is surrounding the joint. So we
and that's a type of protein, isn't it?
Yeah, so we can use it to say, is it present or is it not present? And if it's degraded, how much is it degraded by? And therefore, what sort of state the disease is in, how is the disease progressing, by looking at the collagen being present, like you said, this protein being present, and the structure of it.
So is it a diagnostic tool, a bit like MRIs and X-rays, for example?
Yeah, that's how we plan to use it, as a way of diagnosis. And the idea is that it's a sort of natural property of the material that you're looking at, so we're not having to put anything additional into the material, and that makes it quite minimally invasive, so we should be able to do it sort of in a way that doesn't sort of cut into the patient or cause any damage to the patient.
Or you're not like ingesting dyes or other kinds of things like that.
No.
And could you tell me maybe a little bit how it might differ from X-rays or MRIs or CT scans? Because again, those are forms of radiation, aren't they? And we shouldn't be exposed to some of those forms of scanning too often. So maybe could you talk us through a bit about the different types of scanning and what's great about Raman spectroscopy?
Sure,
Thank you.
problem. Yeah, so X-ray. X-rays, as you mentioned, they're very good at showing up the bones in their body, something that we're all very familiar with. But yes, they can be damaging. So, when you go to have an X-ray, the technician often has to stand away, and you can only have so many in a period of time.
They've got like a lead apron or something on, isn't it?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, so that's because they're very, very high energy, and therefore they can cause some damage. They're what we call ionizing radiation, so they can change the property of what you're looking at. So light comes under the form of non-ionizing, so therefore it doesn't have enough energy to cause those changes. So if we choose our light very carefully, we can choose it in a way as not to damage what we're looking at. So that's a really nice benefit over X-ray. MRI, again, is a great technique, but it's very expensive in the clinic. It's very noisy. Some patients find it quite unpleasant. So we feel there's a real niche where kind of optical techniques can add. And actually, it has this really nice property of being able to, in the case of Raman, identify what molecules are present. And it also gives amazing resolution. So you can see things much smaller in the body than than you can with MRI. You can see individual cells, individual components in cells. So the resolution you get far exceeds X-ray and MRI. So it's got some nice benefits to offer in that space.
Well, absolutely. So if I went to the hospital and I was going for, I don't know, is it called a Raman scan? What would that look and feel like as a patient?
Yeah, so the technology is kind of working its way to that point. But yeah, it should be something a little bit like maybe an OCT scan that you've had in your eye. That's an optical technique that scans in the body. So you'd have a light would be shone at the part of the body that you were having your scan, and then there'd be some clever sort of sensors and detectors looking at the wavelengths of the light coming back from the sample.
And then how do you decide what wavelength of light you're going to shine? Because like you said, the laser has one particular wavelength. How do you decide which wavelength that should be? Does that differ depending on which disease you might be trying to profile?
Yeah, it can do. You can choose it to differ. You send your wavelength of light in, and the wavelength shifts by a certain amount depending on the molecules. And what you really want to do is shift it by a large enough amount that you can detect that difference. So that's where you might tune the colour of the light that you shine on your sample, so that you get a big enough shift so that you can detect it on your detector. But essentially the mechanism's exactly the same, and it will happen at all wavelengths. It's just whether it's detectable. So that's where we sometimes change the wavelength of the light that we're using.
Okay, no. Yeah. And let's talk a little bit about history. I'm always so interested in the history of where things come from in science and engineering. So tell us a bit about Raman himself.
Yeah. So Raman was an Indian physicist. C.V. Raman was his name, and he discovered this property of this Raman spectroscopy and this shift in the wavelength of light, and he won the Nobel Prize for that discovery in 1928. So made a very important contribution to science.
So quite a kind of 20th century technique, really.
Yeah. So it's the sort of fundamentals of the technique have been known about for a long time, and it's one of those techniques that's constantly finding kind of new uses and new ways in which we can employ it on Mars or in the body. It's very exciting.
I mean, you've already given us a huge range of applications, going from space to a single cell in the human body. Are there other applications that you're excited about that might be something to study in the future?
Yeah, so the work that I do is very much about trying to image biological tissue with optics. So that's we're looking for kind of applications in that sort of sphere and in that space, and that's where we collaborate with a lot of people to try to understand kind of what the problems are that need to kind of be tackled. So the challenge at the moment is really this trying to image deep into the human body, and we're sort of developing kind of new lasers and new ways of shaping light and some new AI to allow us to do that, to get the Raman spectroscopy signal from as deep as possible into the body, because that's where it has the applications.
That's brilliant. And I just think it's wonderful that it's a multidisciplinary team, because for me that's such an important part of science, isn't it?
It's what I love and it's what I enjoy, and it's really nice kind of just sharing ideas, and you learn something at every meeting, so it's fantastic.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you so much for your time, Amanda. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much to Amanda Wright from Nottingham. My next guest is Helen Sharman, who is a chemist and Britain's first ever astronaut. Since her trip to the Mir space station back in 1991, she has been a brilliant, skilled science communicator, enthusing and awing audiences all around the world.
Britain's first astronaut is in space. The Soyuz spacecraft carrying Helen Sharman and 2 Soviet cosmonauts was launched successfully this afternoon from the Baikonur Space Center in the Soviet Union.
I feel weightless. I'm floating. I'm not sitting in my seat now. Definitely you feel very detached. I'm looking down on the rest of things, and I'm not part of it anymore.
Helen, it's such an honour to have you here. Can you tell us a bit about your science background to start off with?
Well, I ended up studying a science degree after school, but I really couldn't decide what to choose. I love animals, music, foreign languages and sciences, and I liked all of that at school, and I was really, which one to study, and honestly I wasn't very adventurous, so I didn't really think much about the stuff that you don't know from school, like the engineering subjects. So I was thinking, well, if I did chemistry, it was a kind of an in-between science, and perhaps I could go one way or the other. As long as it was a STEM subject, then that would open options for me later on that might not be open to me if I'd done something else. So yeah, I decided chemistry. That's what I studied.
And I mean, what an option it opened to you.
I know.
Talk about this advert that you heard on the radio.
So yeah, I was working for Mars Confectionery actually at the time, which is a great name for a company if you're going to be an astronaut. But I've got no idea when I started working there that that's what I was going to be. So yeah, I was just driving my car home from work, as you do, listening to the radio. Though I had one of those radio stations in the car, radio sets where you push the button and the next station up the dial kind of just dials in, automatically tunes in. And I kept pushing the button, trying to find some decent music. And then I heard an announcement, astronaut wanted, no experience necessary. And it described this brand new opportunity, never been around for people like me in Britain, just to apply to be an astronaut. There hadn't been a British astronaut before. No. And so this was a special space mission created for the first British astronaut to go and do experiments on a space station. And wow, you know, what an opportunity. And it was going through my mind, yeah, that'd be fantastic. And the first criterion was you must have a STEM subject education. Didn't matter what STEM subject, but as long as it was a STEM subject, I thought, yeah, I've got chemistry, I could do that. But they'll not choose me. Of course they won't choose me, right? They're bound to choose somebody who's military, a pilot.
And I was going to ask, like, did you have, like, I don't know, were you super athletic and into sports or something?
Well, I was reasonably fit and healthy, but nothing, you know, I didn't run marathons, I was no Olympian or anything like that. I just enjoyed keeping fit and doing bits of sport every now and again. And that, yes, we had to be reasonably healthy and fit. That was, medicals were part of the selection. And also to be quite familiar, I suppose, with other foreign languages, because we had to learn to speak the Russian language very quickly, because all the training was going to be done in the Russian language. Wow. So the ability to learn Russian was going to be important. And because I'd previously loved learning foreign languages, you know, when I was at school and I couldn't decide what to choose. So actually it all came in the end. It was almost like the perfect job, even though I could never have imagined when I was at school, when I was choosing my degree, that choosing that STEM subject could lead to something like that.
And did the music ever come back in?
I took some music into space with me. And actually recently I've been able to play keyboard with Richard Hawley. Yes, in some of the live concerts in Sheffield. Absolutely fabulous. So it does come useful sometimes.
No, I love the idea that it's not just the science, but also, you know, the languages, the music and everything that kind of plays into making you an all-rounded astronaut, really.
Well, you can't be a boring person in space, right? You're going to really cheese off all your crewmates if you're really dull. And I think it's important not to take yourself too seriously as well. You've got to know when it's important to focus, to do what you need to do, and then, you know, to relax and enjoy being a person, being an individual with your crewmates, and trusting each other. And you need to have both of those things going on.
Was there any very scary moment while you were on your way there or on your way back or there, in fact?
I would say never really scary, because we understood what was going on and what we had to do. The most, I suppose, unexpected moment was when the alarms all went off not long after I'd arrived on the space station. And it turned out that we didn't have enough electrical energy in the batteries because the solar panels hadn't been directed towards the sun as well as they should have done, and some were masked by a new module that had just been added to the space station. And after we arrived, you know, it was thought that maybe we'd just have enough electrical energy to pull us through when we were around the dark side of the Earth. But we didn't. And so the emergency signals went off. The commander sort of floats off to the control panel and immediately comes back to everybody and explains what's going on. Yes, okay, so we just have to make sure we can move into fresh air, because you don't get the normal air circulation currents that we do on Earth, and so you need to make sure you don't suffocate in your own buildup of carbon dioxide. So you keep moving around, but because of our training we knew that. And then once we come back round the Earth into the sunshine again, solar panels absorb solar energy, electrical energy. The lights came on because the lights had all gone off, right? All fans had gone off to try and conserve power. So yeah, so that was, I suppose, the most unexpected.
That was intense. That sounds, for me, for someone who doesn't really like flying and doesn't love heights, I mean, the idea of being kind of shot off the Earth's surface at high speed doesn't sound particularly appealing.
But if you're trained, you know what you've got to do. And I think that's the thing, is that I would be scared if somebody told me I was going into space tomorrow, because I wouldn't know what I had to do. I wouldn't know the mission. I wouldn't know that particular spacecraft, possibly. But if your training is good, if you really, we're scared of the unknown, I think. So if you're scared of something, my story, I always say,
get
just
the knowledge.
Find out about it.
Yeah. And how long did you have to train for the 8 days that you spent in space?
Yeah, 8 days in space, 18 months training.
Wow.
Now, 18 months is quite a short training period for astronauts who are going to be career astronauts. So if you're going to be a, let's say, European Space Agency employed astronaut, then they train for 5 years or more before they even get their first sniff of a space flight. Some for much longer.
Yeah.
But then they're training for all sorts of different missions. Mine was already very, very specific. We knew what we were going to have to do in space. The mission was assigned. So, 18 months.
Brilliant. And tell me a little bit about what you've been doing since those 8 days, because I'm sure you're fed up of getting questions about these 8 days many years ago now.
No,
but tell me what you're doing now.
It's lovely to talk about it still, and I know partly because it was fun time for me. But if people are interested, then that's nice. It's nice to talk about something, because it wasn't just my mission. It was a British space mission, so I do feel should share it. But no, subsequently, it's been great to get involved in science communication. Now, not that I ever thought I would want to do that. I was very, very shy. Even in space, I was quite shy. So I didn't mind sort of chatting on the radio. Even doing some TV work was fine, because if it was a TV camera, it didn't feel like there was loads of people. But when I was first asked to go and give a speech in front of a large audience, oh my goodness, I was so worried about that. But then I started to go into some schools, and I'd set up a programme of sort of talks around schools not long after my space flight. And I thought really it was really to tell them about my space flight. And the teachers were saying, well, this is great, but actually it's so good for the science. And this is the curriculum for this age group, and so on and so on. And the teachers were brilliant at helping me to understand how to turn a story about space into what's really basically science. So whether you're talking electrolysis or convection or radiation, all of that, Newton's laws, chemical propulsion, there's so much that it's just basic science. And so I started to think, my goodness, this is something that would be really a useful thing to put my mission to. So I started thinking and talking about science.
Bringing science to life, what an amazing thing to do.
So it's been great fun.
That's great. Helen, we've talked a bit about that feeling of being blasted off into space, but what was it like coming back?
Well, returning to Earth is actually a bigger ride in some respects, because you get more G of deceleration. So we had about 5.5 G of deceleration coming back through the atmosphere. It's only about 4.5 during the launch. And it's quite bumpy as well as you come through different layers of the atmosphere. And you start to see a glow around the outside of the spacecraft, which is the plasma building up around the outside. So as the upper layers of the atmosphere get really hot, they get charged and they start to give off this light. It's quite an exciting time, really. And then the parachutes open up, and then finally, just about 1.5 meters above the ground, we get some retro rockets just to make the landing a bit softer. But it is still a bit of a bump.
You came down on land as opposed to water?
Yes,
in your
exactly,
particular
dry
case?
land. So that was where we'd intended to land. So SpaceX will bring their crew back into water, and that's planned. But we'd planned to come on dry land.
And then you come out of the module, and then you kind of step back onto Earth. What is that like?
I suppose it's getting used to feeling balance again for me. So I'd been into space for 8 days. It wasn't long enough to really have weak muscles, and so to feel physically like I couldn't really stand up very much. Some astronauts feel quite faint as well if they've been in space a long time, because suddenly blood is pulled away and down towards their feet, away from their heads. But that wasn't, for me, an issue. It was more just a balance. So I felt a bit wobbly. And so when I wanted to walk, my leg felt really heavy. So I had a natural tendency to lean over when I picked my leg up, and then I put it down. And then when I picked my other leg up, that felt heavy. So I was kind of walking in this wobbly way. It took about 20 paces to sort of retrain my brain.
Pretty quick, I mean, to be honest, considering what a huge change physically it is, isn't it?
Adaptable. I mean, human bodies are fabulous.
Amazing. What was it like as a woman in space? Was there sexism surrounding your launch? And so, I mean, one of the things I do remember is when the press came out a few years ago when Tim Peake went up into space, they were calling him the first British astronaut. And I was shouting at the telly going, no, he's the first male astronaut if you want to do that. He's the second British astronaut. But what was your experience from that
Well, yes, it
perspective?
wasn't totally with Tim Peake. It wasn't Tim's fault. It wasn't the media's
wasn't,
fault either.
no.
It was the UK Space Agency who actually told the media that Tim Peake was the first British astronaut. So yes, that was a bit of a naughty thing to do, putting it mildly. But no, in terms of my space flight, it was great. I mean, I trained with the Soviets. The Soviets, communists, had women train drivers, engineers, astronauts. They knew they needed their women as part of the workforce way in advance of people in Western Europe waking up to the same idea. So it was great. I mean, they have a different kind of culture socially. So, men would take my coat off for me and hang it up. Very nice.
What about your spacesuit? Was that...
No, I did my own spacesuit. but basically, when it came to work, I was just treated as one of the crew, and that was lovely.
That's a really good way of looking at it. Now, tell me about alien life. Do you think alien life exists?
It must do somewhere. I think we would be quite an arrogant species, wouldn't we, to think that only us in terms of intelligent life in the whole universe, with all of those stars, all of those planets, surely somewhere. Whether or not we'd recognise it as intelligent, whether or not it really is made of carbon. I know a lot of scientists will say, "Oh, carbon complex," so it has to be carbon-based. But I just wonder, could it possibly be silicon? And then other people will say, "Well, what about the temperatures?" Yeah, but we don't know what the temperatures and conditions are in many places. So I think somewhere there must be, but certainly it would be so exciting to find evidence of some sort of life, whether or not we'd call it alien or intelligent.
So we have a little surprise for you now. We have a question for you from Professor Brian Cox. Should we have a listen?
Helen, we saw the launch of Starship, right? This monumental SpaceX rocket that's supposed to be the future of crewed space exploration. And it kind of demolished the launch pad and it didn't work very well. So what's your feeling? How optimistic are you that these giant spacecraft are going to be voyaging out to the moon and perhaps even onwards to Mars, let's say within the next 10 years or so?
That's an interesting question, isn't it, from Brian? Yes. So I think the future is for a lot of commercial spacecraft, whether they're giant ones, as Brian said, or whether actually they're going to be quite a few other smaller ones as well. And we're going to need a mixture of them. But yes, I do think that ultimately we will have a few giant ones going off into space. The giant ones will be needed to go perhaps further than we've ever been before. And I suppose that's Elon Musk's dream, is to be able to get his rocket to Mars. But yeah, we're going to need a variety of different launchers, because space is becoming so much more accessible, affordable for a lot of researchers. And I can see a time when it's not just people who are astronauts who go into space, but people who are researchers. They might be employed in industry or by some institution, and they will need to do their research in space. So a lot more of us will have the chance to experience it.
I mean, that sounds brilliant. I'm a big Star Trek fan, so I can't wait to get onto some kind of spaceship and go for a bit of an exploration. It's been absolutely brilliant to chat to you, Helen.
Thank you, and it's been my pleasure.
Now, if you are a fan of rock music, you're going to love our next exhibit. Fran is down there in the mosh pit. Can you hear me, Fran? Fran, can you hear me?
Sorry, Roma, I was in my own little world then, but it's a world that is about to be joined with Marcus from the University of Chichester and Jules from Roland. So obviously we have the drum kit, but what's that got to do with science?
So we're building up this scientific understanding of the drummer. So what we want to expose you to today is a little bit of an insight into the technical requirements and the physical requirements of drumming. So if I'd like to pass you over to Jules, my colleague from Roland, he'll give you some basic instruction and let's see where we end up.
Oh gosh, that sounds a bit ominous. So what is it that we're going to do, Jules?
Okay, Fran, so I'm going to teach you to play a really basic drum beat and what we call a drum fill as well.
Okay, really basic, yeah?
For sure.
Totally be able to do it.
So actually what you're going to do here is you're going to use 4 limbs independently of one another and coordinate them in order to be able to play this beat.
Right.
So what I'd like you to do is to start by playing the hi-hat here with your left hand, and I want you to count a nice 4 beats.
Right, so like 1, 2, 3, 4.
Great.
1, 2, 3.
So then we're going to introduce the kick drum, and we're going to put that on beats 1 and beat 3.
So 1, 2, 3. I've got it. it. Right. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Totally got it. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Amazing.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
This isn't the hard bit. This is the easy bit.
I'm concentrating. 1, 2, 3, 4.
And the next part is you're going to introduce this drum here called the snare drum.
There's
on beats.
more?
Oh yeah.
All right, okay.
So you're going to put that on beats 2 and beats 4. So
the big drum down here with the kickboard, 3 and, no.
1 and 3.
Totally got it. 1 and 3. This one on 2 and 4.
And this one on all 4,
Yeah.
all at the same time. Go for it.
1, 2, 3. And I thought patting your head and rubbing your belly was it. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2.
Amazing, you got it. You got it. Yeah, absolutely.
Really?
That's it.
You've been kind.
And then the last thing we'll do to finish off with the drum fill, so we're going to go.
So I do this or just do I do it all or just this bit?
You can bring it all together.
Okay. Oh, are you ready? Right, so 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. 1, 2. I'm going to be here all day. 1, 2, 3, 4. Do you know what? That is not easy, is it?
So if I could just ask you to go back to just counting on the 1.
Yeah, 1, 2, 3.
So your heart is now pumping.
It really is.
It really is. So if you can, that's roughly 60 to 70 beats per minute at rest. If you can play as fast as you can with both hands on that hi-hat now.
Right.
That's awesome. So in a gig, someone like Clem Burke playing with Blondie will reach 180 to 190 beats per minute.
Oh, gosh.
So imagine that level of concentration, 80,000 people expecting you to hit every note. That is the world of the elite drummer that we're looking to share with everybody. And I think I could see you at Glastonbury next year.
Absolutely, headlining. But I've worked up a sweat here. It is like you're a performer, right? Doing this.
Yeah, so very interesting for us. Drummers drop 2 litres of fluid per hour, which is similar to a world-class endurance athlete.
Oh, gosh.
So I think after we've finished, it might be the time for a slight beverage.
I'm always up for that. Roma, you should come and join me with the drums and with the beverage. This is great. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you.
Fran, I'm getting some real Animal from the Muppets vibes from you, but I think we're going to have a slightly more chilled out chat here in the studio now. I've got Ruth Lurie with me. She's a sport and exercise psychologist, and she's here to tell me more about what we've just seen. Hi, Ruth.
Hello there.
Great to have you here.
Nice to meet you.
How long have you been drumming?
So I'm not a drummer myself.
You're not a drummer
No. So I'm the one with the clipboard behind, observing and recording different data.
Are you interested in music? I mean, what brought you to this particular line of work?
So it's probably a bit of a long story, but I used to be a nursery nurse before I went to university. So I had another career before I then went as a mature student to university. And I've always had an interest in music and its ability to reach out to children. So then when I started a job in particular, I used the psychology then to try and understand the benefits of music for children, in particular rock drumming.
Why rock drumming in particular?
So it's a rather long story. So one of my colleagues at the time, Dr. Marcus Smith, who's now a professor, he had looked at the physiological demands of elite, if you like, or professional drummers. And what he found was that as they go across a concert, which might last 90 minutes, they're expending as much energy as an athlete might spend in a 90-minute football match or a competitive bout. So if you imagine that they're doing that night after night, not just at the weekend, they need to think about both their preparation and their recovery so that they can finish the tour, if you like, which might run for 6 months. So as we talked about that research, we had a lot of parents would come and tell us that children who had autism, who had dyspraxia, dyslexia, really benefited from rock drumming. So we wanted to set out and provide evidence for that.
It's really interesting because, my initial reaction would be that, calm classical music or violins or like a nice little piano thing would be the thing that calms, a child down or that might make you feel more, at ease with yourself or whatever. So So what is it about the rock drumming that you're finding in particular that actually brings that sense of, I don't know, peace or stability?
So it's interesting that you say that, because we see similar parallels to sport and exercise. So people assume that after doing sport or exercise that you might have elevated mood. So you might be running around and still continue to be hyperactive. But what we see is almost the opposite, that they have that experience and then there's a calming period. So it's about the concentration and the absorption in the moment. And then after that, that just leaves them with a sense of satisfaction, having learnt something that they enjoy and they really want to do.
So I like knitting and crochet, and someone told me that because I'm using kind of both my hands and both sides of my brain to do that it's actually quite therapeutic. Is there some parallels with the drumming?
Yes, so with knitting, what you'll find is that it's very, when you start to knit, you're very mindful of what you're doing, so everything's very laboured. And you might have used those old analogies of knit one, purl one, slip off, and those sorts of elements. With drumming instructors use a similar technique. So they use words like paradiddle, and that's to mimic the sound that they're looking for, and particularly the difference between one stick and the other. As you then perfect the skill, you drop the words, you don't need them anymore, and you become less conscious of what you're doing, and it becomes much more automatic. So you might have noticed that you can watch the TV or have a conversation with somebody else as you knit.
Now I can, yeah.
Well, what the drummer can do is that they can vary the routine. They can have a conversation with other people around them. They can interact with the rest of the band.
So you kind of go into this almost flow meditative sort of state?
Yes, and that's the word that psychologists use, is one of flow. So that feeling of being unconscious and not aware of what you're doing, and that can be calming and relaxing. And
so does the beneficial effects of the drumming wear out if you're in the flow and I guess just going with it? Is it the act of learning the new skill that's therapeutic? Like, is that part of your research?
So there are two aspects to it. So learning a new skill is beneficial in itself because you're creating new pathways within the brain. So it's what we call brain plasticity or neuroplasticity that you might have heard of. And that can happen. It was often thought that it only happened up to a particular age within youth, but you can teach an old dog new tricks. You know, there is benefits then for people, and it's been used within rehabilitation for people with brain difficulties. But the learned skills that you have, they're relaxing because they are so automatic. So that's why you see some people with fidget spinners or tapping out a technique, because it's a simple thing that they've learned over time, and therefore it's relaxing for them.
And what is the outreach work that you're doing with children in relation to your research?
Yes, so what we find is that when we've gone in to do a research project, it often has a finite cut-off point, usually due to funding. And when that comes to an end, what we do is we tend to leave the kits that have been provided for us as part of that research with the school. And the teachers have often seen the benefits, so they then look to resource paying for the drum instructor to continue on with that. So we've got a number of different schools across England, so in Liverpool, Bedfordshire, West Sussex, Gloucester, Forest of Dean that we're working with.
That sounds brilliant, and it sounds like I should get my 4-year-old a drum kit. Or maybe not, actually. I don't think I want to listen to her drumming at home.
Well, the benefit is that people often associate drumming with the acoustic set.
Yes.
That the noise that you hear is the noise that you get, whereas the drum kits that we use are electronic, so they come with a pair of headphones. Right. So your daughter would hear the music, and all you would hear is tapping on the rubber pads of the
I think I could probably cope with that.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. It's been really fascinating. Now, I'm hoping that Fran has managed to tear herself away from the drum kit and move on to our next exhibit.
Yes, I have moved swiftly on to the Young Researcher Zone, where 10 school groups from across the UK are presenting some of the projects that have been funded by the Royal Society's Partnership Grant Scheme. Today I've only got a chance to talk to 2 of those schools, and one of them is Bilborough College, where Isla here will explain a little bit more about what's going on here. So what have you been studying, Isla?
So we're looking at the impact of pedestrianisation on air and noise pollution, specifically in Nottingham, because that's where our college is located. And we're also looking at how deprivation can be impacted by air and noise pollution, or like how they kind of impact each other and cause each other. So over here we're collecting some data for our own use. So we've got, if you'd like to put a sticker on where you think the government policy is on, do you think a lot of action has been taken, a lot of progress is being made on air and noise pollution, or do you think it's a lot lesser?
Oh, let me have a look. I've got no nails. I am a nail biter. I'm such a nail biter. Okay. So what is it? On this side, yes, good progress is being made, or no, very little. Oh, what do we think? Do we think made on tackling noise? It depends where you are.
Yeah, I think as a general thing.
Yeah,
maybe to do an average.
Like here?
Yeah.
I'm going to go there.
Yeah. So here we've got our equipment we've been using to do our kind of data collection. We're quite early on in the process just because of some issues with getting the equipment. But this is a handheld air pollution monitor.
That is brilliant. Okay.
So that was made for us by King's College London.
And what does it detect?
So if you look at there's the gaps here at the back where the air gets passed through, and it'll detect particulate matter and nitrous oxides.
Okay, so that's
pollutants.
These gaps here.
Yeah. And then it's got a GPS module so we can geolocate our data, because we're really interested in geography. We're a geography group.
And so this is one device, and do you move that device around, or have you got multiple put around?
We've got a fixed station at our college, which is where we're collecting data to do with, specifically where our college is and how the air pollution is there. But we've been taking that round Nottingham city centre to see what it's like there. And we've also got a handheld sound level meter, so we can measure noise pollution as well, because we think that's quite important.
And so I can measure the sound, right? Yeah. Do you want to have a bit of a shout in it?
All right.
Let's see, so this measures sound level, right?
Yeah.
So if I speak like this, you can see it going up, yeah? Yes, you can. And you can hold this against traffic and things like that, and just see what the sound level is like. Brilliant.
And then we've also been asking people to indicate on the map where they think air pollution is best and worst on noise pollution in Nottingham by explaining to them a bit about what Nottingham's like, because a lot of people haven't been before. And then if you indicate them on there, you can see where it is best and worst. And we've got the answers as well here.
Absolutely. Isla, thank you so much for taking the time out. I know it's super busy here, but I have to go and speak to another group. Thank you so much, and keep up the great work.
Thank you.
And this is Shimon from Northfleet Technology College.
Yep.
So what is your project? What's been going on?
Our project is about the biodiversity in London. As we all know, London is a polluted place, obviously. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to investigate how humans and animals can live in harmony in London in such a polluted place. What we've done is we've taken our nature reserve that we had in our fields, which was in derelict. The houses nearby were throwing their rubbish into it, and it was all rubbish. It was just disgusting.
It was gone,
It was gone. So what we did 2.5 years ago, we came in and we thought we've got to change this. So we put all the rubbish into the bins and we started tidying up. The first thing we did was we started putting trees in. So what we did, we received hundreds and hundreds of trees, which we put around the fence, and then we decided to take on another project, which was the bees that we have here.
Right.
And these
bees. This is great. This is fantastic.
And these bees that we've received are helping us to pollinate our field, create more flora, invite more fauna in. And our fauna, we have a couple foxes in there, millions. We've got loads of squirrels, absolute tons. We've got tons of birds as well. Butterflies, insects, we've got everything.
And is this a live camera of what's going on?
Yes, so this is actually a recorded, but we have a live. This, we can just investigate what's going on. For example, last week we saw some foxes in there as well. Saw foxes playing in the grass, digging a hole underneath our fence, trying to get out.
Brilliant.
And then, whilst they're doing, with the bees, obviously bees make honey, right?
Yeah.
And then humans like honey. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to take that honey and then sell it for profit, so that what we can do is reach out to other primary schools and then fund their climate change projects. so which I think is brilliant. Yeah.
This is absolutely brilliant. You can't quite rightly think it's brilliant because it absolutely is. And it goes to show what can be done when you sort of put your mind to it and get involved. Oh my gosh, this is fantastic. Thank you so much. Roma, it's back to you.
I'm so impressed by those young scientists. And now I'm joined by someone with just slightly more experience, Gareth Veal. Welcome.
Hi there.
Can you tell us a little bit about how difficult childhood cancer is in terms of scale? What is the scale of issue we're dealing with here?
So in terms of metrics, there are around 1,800 children in the UK who are diagnosed with cancer each year. So that equates to around 5 patients a day.
Wow.
In terms of the impact on families, it's really hard. I think unless you've actually been in that situation where a child is diagnosed with cancer, I think that's incredibly difficult to be able to explain. I know from many years of doing clinical research, it's incredible how positive these families, stay. We carry out clinical trials, we carry out some research. The research we're talking about here down in London this week is very much a research project where the patients benefit. But actually we do a lot of research projects where it relies on the altruism of the families. So basically they're kind of like wanting to be involved in research, even if it doesn't help their child, potentially for future children. So the positivity of the families just always amazes me. It's always very inspiring.
Yeah, I can't imagine that it must be one of the worst things that you
Absolutely,
have to deal with in your life.
Yeah,
so, when you're treating childhood cancers, chemotherapy is tough for adults. Can you tell me a bit about the effect it has on younger bodies?
Yeah, so I think chemotherapy is challenging for any patient. At the end of the day, you're targeting your own cells. There's a subpopulation of your cells where there is this uncontrolled cell division. So most of the drugs, or certainly the well-established drugs, they're very much designed to target cell division or DNA replication. So that's obviously going to hit your host cells. There's going to be side effects.
Because all cells do that, isn't it?
Absolutely. So we know that the classic side effects of chemotherapy, like the hair loss, affects your bone marrow because you're creating hundreds of thousands of blood cells each day. They're the kind of acute effects, but after your chemotherapy, those effects will, the hair will grow back, etc. Some of the more serious side effects, and this particularly is the case with children with well-established drugs, things like kidney toxicity, so damage to the kidneys. In very young children, sometimes hearing loss, effects on fertility. These are more long-term effects, which are then clearly going to affect the quality of life of the patient in more in the long term.
Yeah, so a really, really tough problem to deal with, and I'm glad that some people like you are trying to improve that situation. Could you explain a little bit about how that can be improved, and what is the work that you're doing?
So the work that we do, we essentially look at kind of personalising the treatment in these patients. So one of the reasons why it's particularly challenging in children is because if you think in the paediatric space, we're going to be dealing with babies from literally the first days or weeks of life through to teenagers, 15, 16-year-old teenagers. Clearly, we're going to need to dose patients differently. They're going to handle drugs differently, etc. In adults, it's a little bit more homogeneous. Also in adults, there are some of the newer drugs, the targeted drugs, are a bit kinder, a bit fewer side effects. The more well-established drugs that are used to treat children with cancer, as I say, they generally target cell division, DNA replication. So there are some of these quite severe side effects that are going to affect those children throughout their life. So we essentially look at following a standard dose of drug in patients. What does that mean in terms of drug exposure? And the best way to kind of explain that, I guess, is a therapeutic drug monitoring approach. If we had patients being treated, maybe there's a baby being treated at Great Ormond Street, there might be a baby being treated in Birmingham Children's Hospital, and there may be a baby being treated in Newcastle Hospital. Those babies are all very similar in terms of the physical size. They may be receiving the same chemotherapy for the same tumour type. But actually, following a standard dose of chemotherapy, one of those children may have a very low exposure to the drug. And when I talk about exposure, I mean the concentration of drug that's actually in the bloodstream, because that's how the drug gets around the body to the tumour cells.
So that's about how much the child is actually absorbing into their bloodstream.
Yes,
what's effective?
Yeah. So it's to do with absorption, it's to do with the rate of metabolism and clearance of the drug. And especially in very young children, this varies a lot because, example, your kidneys are still developing in a very young child, your liver enzymes are at different levels. So a second patient may have the kind of right exposure by chance from the dose that's given. And then a third patient may have a much higher drug exposure, and those patients are potentially more likely to get toxicity. So what we want is a bit like a kind of Goldilocks thing. You want that just right, not too much, not too little, because we know that if you've got too low an exposure, you're less likely to respond or you're more likely to relapse. And we know that if you get too high an exposure, you're more likely to have some of these more severe side effects. So in the UK, there are around, I think it's estimated over 40,000 childhood cancer survivors. Over, I think between 75 and 80% of children now who are diagnosed with cancer will survive their treatment, but around 2/3 of those children will have kind of side effects that are going to affect their quality of life. So the project that we have, the therapeutic drug monitoring, we already do it as a national programme. In terms of the project that we have and that we're showcasing at the exhibit this week, it's a link with a group of chemical engineers at the UCL and a spin-out company called Vicinta. So we're kind of marrying together our medical science experience and research experience with their chemical engineering experience. And the idea is to have a kind of a hardware device which would be available at point of care, so within the hospitals. At the moment, in order to do the dose adjustments in patients, samples have to be sent to our lab in Newcastle at Newcastle University. Right. To make it much more accessible, what we would like is to have this kind of hardware available at point of care on a hospital ward so that a doctor or a nurse can use it.
And what that device is doing is measuring the child's response to the drug, like you mentioned.
So it's measuring the actual individual child's concentration of drug or drug exposure based on the blood concentration. Yeah. So at the moment, these children we're talking about in the different hospitals, blood samples will be collected by the nurse or the doctor, and they will be sent to our lab for analysis. So that's basically a collection, a storage, an overnight courier, and then in a busy lab analysing those samples.
And then you're sending results back, and then they will adjust dosages.
So there's lots of logistical challenges, absolutely right. Yeah. So we just want to make it more accessible and streamline it, and this piece of kit, this ChromaDose hardware, will allow that to be done in hospitals around the UK.
Amazing. Can you tell us a bit about where you are in the process of your research at the moment?
Yeah, so as I say, we have the national programme in place, so we're already in a situation where children are benefiting from the research that we do. In terms of the link with UCL and Vicinta, we're looking at probably early in 2025 when we hope to have our first actual kind of piece of kit available, which could be tested in probably in hospitals in Newcastle and London as a kind of proof of principle with the first drug. Did you ever think that your career would be so rewarding? No, it's not something I ever really thought about, but you're absolutely right. In terms of job satisfaction, I mean, I work with a great team of people up in Newcastle, but the work that we do a lot of work looking at development of new drugs, as well as this paediatric research programme. So I think we know that the vast majority of work we do is helping patients, whether that's adult patients or in this case in children with cancer. So it's absolutely rewarding. And the other big thing is it just makes you realise, it puts things in perspective. You know, we're analysing clinical samples from babies who are days old being treated for cancer, and it just makes your kind of any problems you have just pale into insignificance, I think.
Definitely. But yeah, like I said before, again, I'm so glad that you and your team do the work that you do. It's been really inspiring talking to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Now we are going to see chromatography in action with Fran, who should be back in the main hall. Are you there, Fran?
Hi, yes, Roma, I have found the sprout, and I'm also joined by Professor Stefan Gooding from UCL. So, hello, Stefan.
Hey, how are you doing?
What's going on with the sprout?
Well, actually, we are testing the population. We want to find out who likes Brussels sprouts, and we want to tell you why you like Brussels sprouts and why you don't like it. So, this is a test to easily find that out. Let's start with this one first.
Okay. And you mean so real Brussels sprouts, not Matt here?
Yeah, just put it on your tongue and see what the sensation will tell you.
Okay.
Like this? What do you taste?
Paper.
Well, that's very good, because it was just a control. This was just a small test.
Now we go. The wrong answer.
No. Now we go with the real test, and we'll find out.
Oh, okay.
So now, actually, there are people that taste nothing, just like with the filter paper, and others have a strong sensation. We'll find out.
Let's give it a go. Okay. Oh, that is disgusting. Like, what is on that?
So on this strip is actually a chemical that causes a bitterness in Brussels sprouts. It's called PTC. And actually many people here on the stall had no sensation whatsoever. It's just that your taste buds are extremely sensitive to this chemical. So when it comes in, they lock in place and they fire a very strong sensation.
So not everyone can taste that?
Not everyone can taste it.
And that's why I don't like Brussels sprouts?
Exactly.
No offense.
But actually, it also just illustrates how it's important to measure drug levels because not every person responds the same way to their medication. So as very much respond to this differently to this chemical, people respond differently to the medication due to distribution, metabolism and clearance. And we need to measure this. And we found a very simple way of measuring drug levels using this principle of color separation chromatography.
Absolutely.
So what you can see here is a black ink and how it's being traveling up when you dip it in water. And this is because different components of the black ink, they travel at different speeds across the paper. And we can do something very similar to separate the drug from the blood, because if we tune this well, our drug will be somewhere in the middle and everything else will be either ahead or below. And using some tricks, we can actually use this to determine exactly the amount of drug in your blood in a very simple way.
Brilliant. So using chromatography, you can know how much drug has actually got to the patient, but gosh, it's beautiful, isn't there? And there's lots of stuff going on over there.
Yeah, exactly. Chromatography is not only fun, it's not only very accurate to measure drug levels, it can be very much fun and you can do beautiful art. So I send you over to Mamtas now and you should do some stuff with her.
Thank you so much. Oh, look at this. Montaz, this looks amazing.
Hi.
Nice to meet you. What is going on here?
Well, I'd say this is the most colourful corner of the entire exhibition.
It absolutely is.
We are trying chromatography.
Of course.
And so we've got 3 different exciting things you can do with your chromatography papers.
Yeah.
We're actually looking at colour separation. So that's what chromatography is. And we're doing it with felt tip pens, some coffee filter paper. This is something that anyone can do at home as well.
Absolutely.
And then you can actually turn it into a flower, a butterfly or a keyring. And what's really exciting is every single one is like, it's so different and it's like so magical. And
brilliant.
Right?
Oh, well, this is fantastic. So you put the pens on, you put a little bit of water, it separates into the different colours.
You know what's amazing about this? Okay, this was one line with a black felt tip pen. And like, look at how many colours you get from a black pen.
That is great. Okay, give me a go. Give me a go, Montaz.
You're going to take your filter paper.
Yeah, got it,
and what we want to do, because we're going to look at colour separation, we want to leave some white gaps in there.
Understood.
And we want to leave the centre point empty as well.
Yeah.
And then you've got your felt tip pens.
Yeah, okay,
This
I'll
only
go for
works
this
with water-based pens, not permanent, so...
Of course, and I just draw any pattern?
Yeah, the great thing is you could write a secret message, you could write words, patterns, no one's going to know.
Right.
When you put it in the water...
It all separate. Right, I'm just going to do a line, I think.
Absolutely, a line can be very magical.
A curly line, squiggly line. Around like this. I'm just going to do one colour actually. I'm going to do it nice and...
So this was black, so let's see what happens with the purple.
And I put it in the water?
So what you want to do is you only want to put the white section in the water.
Okay.
You don't want the whole thing to drop in.
So I just dip
so
it
fold
in.
it a bit more into a cone shape so it's easier
like
to
this?
actually sit in there, that's right. And then just
dip
rest
it
it in, just rest it to the corner.
Like this?
To the edge. So what I normally say is rest it initially, and then it will just start to stick in there.
Right.
And you just wait. We don't need to fall over.
Yeah.
So we're just going to rest it there, and we'll wait and watch for the magic to happen. It takes a few minutes.
Yeah.
You only got the one colour, so we'll just see how that actually travels up.
And you can see the water rising,
some
yeah.
little pinks coming out of there. So we can already see that.
It's totally already working. You can see it coming up. It's a bit wetter than, we would have liked. Oh, that is fantastic. And it's using this method that you've made all of these beautiful things here.
Yeah.
Oh, Montaz, it's such a beautiful way to look at chromatography. That is such an important tool when it comes to science. Roma, it's back to you. Oh, what's going on here?
Amazing, and thanks so much, Fran. Now, last year, the UK recorded its highest ever temperature of 40.3 degrees Celsius. And on the news recently, we've seen devastating floods, droughts. Sorry.
Don't worry.
I need to start again. Okay. Thanks so much, Fran. Now, last year, the UK recorded its highest ever temperature of 40.3 degrees Celsius. And on the news recently, we've seen devastating floods, droughts, and wildfires worldwide. My next guest is Hannah Cloak, a specialist in extreme weather and professor of hydrology at the University of Reading. She has appeared on TV, including in the Panorama episode Wild Weather, Our World Under Threat. and she was the subject of the Life Scientific on Radio 4 in 2021. Welcome, Hannah.
It's lovely to be here.
When did you first discover your fascination with water and geography?
I wonder if I was actually just born into water because, when I was a little girl, I was just fascinated by it. And we used to go on holiday to Devon to see my grandparents every summer. And I just used to throw myself into the sea, go paddling in Dartmoor rivers, and just spent hours and hours in the water. So I think it was there from when I was very, very small. I'm sure that my mum and dad influenced me as well.
That's amazing. I love that. But then water can also be quite a devastating force on the world. So could you talk a little bit about that and the research that you do now?
So I do love water. I love the sound of rain. I love flinging myself into rivers. But I'm very aware that these things can turn into monsters. So heavy rainfall, rivers can turn floody, and they will absolutely devastate communities. So it's really interesting being very fascinated by water and how it moves around the planet, but yet being very aware of how dangerous it can be. And that's really why I do what I do. So I'm interested in flood forecasting, warning people, making sure people can get out of the way of dangerous floods.
Now, it seems like some scientists perhaps are a bit reluctant to kind of pinpoint the cause of some of these extreme weather events as being because of the climate crisis. What's your response to that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because it's always flooded. So it's flooded since before humans existed. And we've always had heat waves, and there's always been forest fires. So it would be wrong to say that every forest fire is caused by climate change. What it does is it makes it more likely. So we see more of them. Sometimes they're more frequent, sometimes they're more intense. So floods can cover more land, they can be more violent. Because of the fingerprints of climate change. So it's really important to distinguish that because we can't just go around saying, oh, this flood is definitely because of climate change, but we can say that it's more likely because of climate change, and the fingerprints of climate change are there, which means that we need to take it seriously.
So it's almost like there's the effect that we're having on the planet is to make things a little bit more riskier in this sort of natural disaster regard.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
The risk changes, that factor of it's going to happen more often, it's going to be worse.
Yeah, and how good are we at predicting, the next flood or the next extreme event like that?
We've got some really good models now. So we have huge computer models of the Earth system that can put together how the atmosphere moves around and what's happening on the land surface and in our rivers. And we're actually pretty good now at saying whether a natural hazard like a fire or a heat wave or a flood is going to happen, even sometimes 2 or 3 weeks ahead.
So is that enough? Is 2 or 3 weeks ahead, I guess, enough to respond to that adequately?
So it depends what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to get people out of the way, then you need at least a week sometimes to prepare all of that stuff in advance. We only tend to hear about things a day in advance. Somebody says, actually tomorrow it's going to rain really hard. You need to, get out of your house. But behind the scenes, people are moving around, putting equipment in the right place, going on alert.
And with this kind of, I guess in the longer term, if I'm, from my perspective as a structural engineer, I've been involved in, urban planning and looking at cities and so on. How can we use the kind of modelling that you do to maybe better design where human beings decide to settle down?
Yeah, humans have a tendency to live in very dangerous places.
We like water, right?
Yeah,
we want to live next to rivers.
Pretty. It's really pretty living next to the river. And, it's really functional. In London, it's, a really nice place to live. People want to live there. It's really expensive. But it can be very, very dangerous indeed. So we have this legacy of people living in really, really dangerous places. But we can use the same types of model that we use when we're forecasting whether a flood is coming next week. We can use that to work out what the risk is of any types of floods coming along. And we can say, these zones are dangerous zones. Do not build here, perhaps even move people out of the way. And then these places, there is still some risk, so you need to adapt your homes or your businesses.
And what kind of timescales are you able to make these predictions on now?
So when we're thinking about an upcoming flood, so it's going to flood tomorrow or next week, we can say with some confidence whether that flood is going to happen. But when we look long term and we think about our changing climate, we can see how likely those types of floods are to happen in the future. And some of the things we're most worried about actually are flash floods, those ones that are really difficult to predict in the short term. And sometimes they come along in an hour or something, a big thunderstorm happens and it sweeps through the streets or along a river. But we know that they are getting more likely in the future. And warming climate means we're holding more water in the atmosphere, heavier rainfall, more intense rainfall, more flash floods.
What about the scene kind of more globally? I guess we've talked a little bit more specifically at the UK perhaps. What's happening on the worldwide basis with flood prediction?
Some of the most vulnerable places in the world are desperately in need of much better flood forecasting and warning systems. A lot of those places, they don't have enough funding to really get to grips with some of these global models. So it's about working together with partners, perhaps in Mozambique and Bangladesh, places that are very filled with floods often, and a lot of people die every year from these types of floods. So the more that we can support those countries and provide kind of the infrastructure and work together with them to help them get the warnings to the people so they can get out of the way of those floods, the better.
Yeah, seems like it's one of those things where, the more we come together, the better our responses can be and so on. So quite a big challenge.
It's a big job.
Challenge.
It is a big job. The world is a very big place.
Yeah.
And we do have global models, and they do provide like flood forecasts and floods, heat wave forecasts. But actually getting that message to the people on the ground, that's really, really tough. So you can only really do that at the local level. So you're moving from global, environmental models to actually psychology at the local level, and that's a big chain of events.
Completely. So now I'm going to ask you a completely different question, which is poetry. Apparently, I've heard that you've written some poetry. There's something about the brain, isn't there, doing arts and science together? I mean, is that something you quite enjoy?
Yeah, I think as a scientist, I was a bit wary about it, thinking that's a bit unscientific. Let's not do that. People will laugh at me. But actually, opening up that different way of thinking actually generates new ideas, and you actually start to think in a different way as well, and communicate in a different way. So I work now with artists, musicians across the board. Do a lot of work with museums, and it's brought a much richer way of communicating things like flood risk.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like, I know this, but, arts and sciences, if we need to talk to each other, then we can learn new things from each other, which is brilliant.
Yeah, and not be frightened. Not be frightened to do so.
No, 100%. Yeah. So that's really great. And is there something that you would be devastated to lose if it got swept away in a flood?
It's really important actually to focus on that when you're trying to communicate to people whether they're at flood risk and what's actually going to happen to them. Because if they just think about like how much rain is falling or how high the river is, it means nothing to them. But if you pick something that's really precious to someone, so for me, that's my grandmother's music box. She gave it to me, sadly she's passed away. It means a lot from my childhood, and it sits on my shelf. And I always imagine, how would I feel if that got swept away in a flood? And to me, that's the real meaning of being at flood risk.
Yeah, and I guess it's a way to explain the risk to other people, like you said, that, it might feel like a very distant thing.
And they have to imagine it. So they have to be able to imagine those floodwaters in the house, putting their possessions at risk, perhaps putting their family at risk. And you need to help that imagination along. So those types of precious objects are really helpful to do that.
Is there something that you would be devastated to lose if it got swept away in a flood?
It's really important actually to focus on that when you're trying to communicate to people whether they're at flood risk and what's actually going to happen to them. Because if they just think about like how much rain is falling or how high the river is, it means nothing to them. But if you pick something that's really precious to someone, so for me, that's my grandmother's music box. She gave it to me, sadly she's passed away. It means a lot from my childhood, and it sits on my shelf. And I always imagine, how would I feel if that got swept away in a flood? And to me, that's the real meaning of being at flood risk.
Yeah, and I guess it's a way to explain the risk to other people, like you said, that, it might feel like a very distant thing.
And they have to imagine it. So they have to be able to imagine those floodwaters in the house, putting their possessions at risk, perhaps putting their family at risk. And you need to help that imagination along. So those types of precious objects are really helpful to do that.
Just to change scales a little bit again, but the Wellcome Trust, which some of our viewers may be familiar with, has recently started talking about how climate change is a health crisis. What are your thoughts on that?
There are so many links between climate and health. I don't think I could cover them all now. I'll pick a couple. Last summer we saw absolutely intense heat in the city. We went over that 40-degree barrier, and it was terrifying, and it meant thousands of people died. And that's pretty severe. And that's in the UK. We're not even thinking about places on the planet where it's absolutely inhospitable to live. So heat is a giant killer. It's a silent killer as well. So we don't. It's not like a roaring floodwater coming through your house. It really picks the vulnerable people as well. So that's an obvious example of where climate and health are so intricately linked.
Thank you so much for chatting to me. It's been fascinating to hear about really what's a major problem worldwide, but also, like you said, the psychology of the family or the person or the community that then has to respond to that on a local level. So I really appreciate your time. Now, everyone knows about 3D movies and gaming, but not all of you will have experienced 3D sound. And I don't just mean stereo or surround sound, I mean audio recorded with ears in the same way we experience sound in real life.
Hello again, I'm here with the Audio Experience Design team and Kat Paul from Imperial College London, and I'm all ears to find out what you have been doing. So Kat, what is this all about?
So essentially we want to make sound immersive. And so when we're listening in the real world, like from me standing next to you, you use your two ears together. And so if you have a sound that's coming to the right of you, it'll be louder in your right ear compared to your left ear. It'll also arrive at this ear quicker than this ear. But what do you do when sounds are coming in this plane? So it's always going to be the same. This is when we use the shape of our ears and sort of the head and our torso to really help us figure out where sounds are coming from. Because if a sound is coming from below, it will bounce around slightly differently than if a sound is coming from above.
Right.
But we don't have the same head and the same ear shape. And so if we wanted to make a really immersive spatial sound scene for you, then we want to be able to replicate how sound bounces around your individual body. So the way that we do that is we take a 3D scan of your head and your shoulders, and then we simulate with some physics models how the sound bounces around for you in every single position. So then we can create a sort of sonic fingerprint for you, and then we can apply that to any sound that we record and say what position it's coming from.
That is brilliant. Now, I am a sucker for an immersive experience, and you're telling me that you can scan my ear, so then I can get an audio experience that is not only immersive, but is super personalized for me.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's do it, Kat. I am on board. Where do I need to go? What do I need to do?
Cool, you're going to come around the side into this booth, and this is where we do the ear scanning.
Right. And I sit on this stool, right?
Yes, so if you come sit on this stool, and so I will just set up the scanner. This is the scanner that we use, and it uses a flashing light. And so if we present the flashing light, hopefully you can see my hand on the screen.
Oh, that's great, yeah.
So we're going to do exactly the same for your ear. So if I can get you to face forwards, and then I will come round. And if you can close your eyes, and I'm just going to move the scanner around your head and build a 3D model.
Okay. Eyes are closed. I'm ready.
There we go. So yeah, as I move it around, it tracks where it's scanned, and then I can angle the light, and then we can get a good picture of your ear.
Okay, so you're just moving it across my ear now?
And so the light shines in every sort of crook and crevice, and it sort of builds up a 3D model of your ear.
Every crook and crevice?
Yep.
Oh no.
And so I'm going to stop now.
Okay, and can I move?
Yeah, now you can move, and now it's all
Okay.
done. So.
And is this it processing the
Exactly.
data?
It's processing the data, it's taking all the sort of, it builds little points, and then after that it meshes it together into a nice 3D model that then we can either look at, or we can print it out on a 3D printer if you really wanted to. So.
Amazing. Oh, okay, let's go and have a look. Oh, I'm a bit nervous. This is my ear, like I have never seen it, and it is, oh my gosh, the details and like the ear piercing, you can see so much. It's a part of your body that you just never see.
No, you never get to see it yourself because it's on the side of your head.
Oh my word, that is absolutely fascinating. And you use this to, I suppose, reverse engineer the immersive experience to make it personalized.
Yeah, exactly. We can just simulate how the sound bounces around in your ear and then create that fingerprint for you.
That is brilliant. Roma, I do hope you were listening to all of that, because no doubt I will test you later, but for now, it's back to you.
Oh, Fran, I don't like having tests, but I am thrilled to have a psychoacoustic specialist, Lorenzo Piccinelli, here to tell us a little bit more about what Fran just did. Lorenzo, welcome. It's great to have you here.
Thank you very much.
What is 3D sound?
3D sound or immersive sound is effectively what we experience in everyday life. So you walk on the street and you hear sounds that come from different positions, at different distances, in different directions, they move differently. And all these attributes about the spatial nature of sounds, or the position and etc., is what we generally refer to as 3D sound or immersive sound. Now, normally with these two expressions, we refer to us simulating this in a virtual environment. An idea could be when you go to the cinema and you listen to this surround sound, Dolby Surround, and there you have a lot of different loudspeakers around you that reproduce sound, and you perceive the sound coming from different directions. So that is the concept.
But you need lots of speakers in order to
in that
achieve
case,
that so
yes.
far?
Yes, so I would say that the majority of the techniques, also at home, you might have multiple loudspeakers. Yeah. Now, what we are trying to do is, starting from the point that we actually hear everything from 2 ears, why don't we go directly to the 2 ears, maybe with a pair of headphones, and try to trick your brain to believe that there is something in a position where there is not. And to do this, we need to have an understanding of the spatial hearing mechanism, so how people make sense of sound from a spatial point of view. So how
that's
do you
more
localize?
in the brain rather than in the ears?
That is very much in the brain,
yeah.
But at the same time, the cues that someone uses are generated by the morphological features of our ear and head. So our head, our pinna, which is this part of the ear, but also the shoulders, the fact that, for example, I don't have much hair, but I have beard. All these things are going to influence the way that sound is modified by these features and the way my brain understands where sound is coming from.
So you and me will hear things quite differently.
Yes, definitely.
Of this stuff.
Yeah, I have a very big head because I'm very intelligent, a lot of brain to be kept inside, and therefore I will have bigger differences in terms of, for example, intensity between the 2 ears. If someone is talking to me from the right, sound is going to take a bit longer to get to my left ear compared to someone who has got a smaller head, for example.
Like me. Yeah.
I don't know. I can't. Yeah, probably.
Probably. So Fran's just had her head scanned.
Yes.
Why did she do that, and what's going to happen next?
Now, in order to run this simulation and to really trick people to believe that there are sounds where there are not, we need to take into account certain morphological features, as I mentioned before. And some of these are individual, so they depend on the person, size of the head, the shape of the pinna. And we have different ways to account for these. The standard way would be to measure them acoustically, but we require a very big lab, like one that we have at Imperial College, time, a lot of loudspeakers, and is a very expensive and time-consuming operation. Another way is to use a 3D scanner. Still rather expensive. These devices are not cheap, but it's definitely faster. So we scan the ear, we scan the head, and then we use certain mathematical methods in order to find out how, from a given position in space, the sound is modified up to the entrance of your ear canal. In reality, what we are doing in this research is trying to do this individualization without having to rely not even on a 3D scanner. So we are collecting scans from as many people as we can. At the moment, actually, we have a few hundred. We are actually, these are all open source, so we share them with the community. And we're trying to find relationships between the morphology of the external ear and the acoustic interaction that these have. And eventually, even now we are starting training neural network models, so artificial intelligence, in order to be able to predict what is someone's own signature from less and less data. Eventually it could just be a picture, or even it could just be some data that you input in the device.
So trying to make it easier to basically figure out that person's individual characteristics, to give them the sound based on all this data that you're collecting.
Exactly,
yeah.
To make it much easier than it is at the moment and that we can do at the moment. Obviously, our goal is not really just to develop a better product, but also to have a better understanding of these mechanisms, both from the acoustic and the psychoacoustic perspectives.
So I've got some headphones here. Should I stick them on? Is that the plan?
You should definitely try.
Okay, let's have a go.
So this is just some of the demonstrations that we use, which are actually available for who visits our stand, and they are available also online.
Yeah.
Headphones are important because we need the left signal to get to your left ear and the right signal to go to your right ear, which doesn't happen with a normal pair of loudspeakers.
If you want to listen along, pop your headphones in and you'll be able to hear what I am about to hear now.
Good morning. I'm here in front of you. Or maybe I'm close to your right ear. Maybe I'm here. Or here. Or again, I could be here. Or here. Or here.
Okay, that's weird.
The other side. Or back in front of you.
That was a particularly strange experience because I was listening to your voice.
So my voice whispering
Kind
and
of
talking
moving,
around.
but so it was like you were on different sides of me,
Yeah.
but also closer and farther away.
Yes.
But clearly I could see you there, so my brain was a little bit confused.
Yeah, that
Let's
is
put it
what
lightly.
often happens. Well, not unfortunately, but sight often takes over. This is why it's often difficult to have a clear sound image that is frontal. When people experience this, they often hear sources on the back because they can't clearly see something on the front, so they believe that is on the back.
Yeah.
Closing your eyes helps in these cases.
Oh, yeah, maybe. It's a bit disconcerting. So is this going to be a big feature of the entertainment industry?
Well, it already is to a certain extent. I mean, Apple's latest products, their EarPods, they already have some of this technology. Now, we don't know exactly what they do, but they do something in this direction. And it is possible that now with Dolby Atmos and all these new things, both from the audiovisual and the music industry, will allow more of this technology to be available. It's also true, when I started this research in this field 20 years ago, headphones were not as widely used as now. If you go on the tube, more than half of the people are going to have a pair of headphones. I had a student who had a pair of headphones that wasn't even connected to something. It was just a fashion statement. So people have headphones, and if you have headphones, then we can do this. So hopefully they're going to become much more, it's going to become a little bit much more mainstream and more integrated, for example, with video game experiences and other things. Here I'm talking about like very good algorithm, because there are already some tools available, but I think in the state of the art, we can actually do better, and it might become available soon.
Oh, that's very exciting. And what about outside of entertainment?
Yeah, outside of entertainment, this is actually the area where we have done more work. So applying this technology to create impact in, let's say, non-leisure activities. So we have used these, for example, for developing auditory displays for blind people. But more recently, we have worked a lot with hearing aid companies. And actually, the other project that we are showing here at the Royal Society is called BEARS, and which stands for both ears. And it involves the development of a series of video games, virtual reality video games, where we employ this technique. What we're trying to do is to replicate what happens in real-life scenarios, specifically in difficult situations where you have, for example, multiple talkers and a target that you want to listen to. And we are planning to use these games for children and teenagers that had a bilateral cochlear implant. So when you have these sort of digital ears that are surgically implanted, you have both ears. The two ears might be rather mismatched for many reasons. So not only maybe one ear is louder than the other, but you might also have a different pitch and slightly different timbre. So often the brain is not really able to fuse the two together. And so we are using a series of games that can be performed only by using both ears at the same time to help them train to use the two implants and to remap their auditory system so that the brain is able to use these altered cues more successfully.
I always love a piece of engineering or science that has entertainment value, but also medical applications. So thank you so much for joining me, Lorenzo. It's been great to hear about your research.
Okay, thank you very much.
Now we're going to take a short break. When we come back, Fran will be going on a special mission deep into the archives of the Royal Society to discover some of its treasures. In the meantime, have you ever wondered what your pet's whiskers are really for? If so, this video from the Royal Society and the BBC will provide the answer.
I study whiskers because they're just the best. Most mammals, they have whiskers. And what's exciting about them is that there's so much stuff that we don't know. I like to look at something that we see every day and then find out really cool and interesting things about them. of people, when they hear about whiskers, they think immediately of cat whiskers, but actually other animals have much better whiskers. They're more sensitive, they're bigger, they move more than cats' whiskers. Porcupine whiskers are just the longest whiskers I've seen. The one I've got back in the lab is about 45 centimeters long, and they move them almost continually, and then they kind of bump and move and vibrate around over the material that they're on. So you can really see that they're moving all the time. Hi, gorgeous. It's very difficult to study the evolution of whiskers because hair isn't really preserved in the fossil record. So we have a look at this little hole here, which is called the infraorbital foramen, or whisker holes. And all the information from the whiskers, from those sensitive follicles, travel through that hole and into the brain. Humans are really quite unusual to not have whiskers, but we do still have these whisker holes where our whiskers would have been. And also we even have some remnants of muscles, similar to what we see in animals with whiskers. Whiskers are very much like human fingertips. Lots of animals can move their whiskers, and then some animals engage in what is called whisking. So this is cyclic forwards and backward movements that the animals make with their whiskers. And we might think of this as scanning. So when we walk into a room, we might be looking around everywhere, trying to see all around us, and that's what these guys are doing. And the fastest whisking that I've seen has been in harvest mice, which reach up to about 25 times per second, which is some of the fastest movements that mammals can make. The most sensitive whiskers are in aquatic mammals. Lots of seals will have kind of just under 2,000 nerve fibers surrounding all of those whiskers in the follicle. And their whiskers are so sensitive, they can do this amazing thing, which is called hydrodynamic sensing. So as a fish swims through the water, it leaves behind a wake, a trail of water movements, and the seals are able to detect this. And they use only their whiskers for this. These are porcupine whiskers, and you can see that they're arranged into a grid or whisker map. So you have rows and columns of whiskers, so they're very ordered. This same grid-like pattern can be seen in physical structures through the brain. And our neuroscientists love this because it means that they can actually tweak one whisker here, so a middle whisker, and they can follow it through the entire brain to see where that sensory signal goes. And each physical structure will light up in turn. In many animals, whiskers are their primary and most important sense. So it's very, very important not to trim them. They won't hurt them, but they'll suddenly remove a sense. So it'd be like if you blindfolded us and then put us in a room. And so we've got to feel around to work out where we are. And that is what these animals are doing all the time. We can see that when we look at rats and mice, that some of them will actually engage in a behavior called barbering. So this is when you have a dominant individual that will trim the whiskers, so bite off the whiskers of their family or other people that live in their box. And so when they do that, those individuals will become more submissive. So it establishes this hierarchy within the cage. Whiskers can inspire lots of new technology and innovations. Firstly, we could have a look at their shape. So the undulations of seal whiskers has inspired, for instance, turbine blades. So turbine blades can be extra aerodynamic because they have these amazing undulations or waves along them. These could also be applied to tidal energy as well. Then you have the fact that they are sensors. You can put these sensors onto robots. So then you can have tactile robots or whisker bots. And these could be really useful for something even like a robot hoover, but also to make sure that robots can go into hazardous, dark or complex environments. these are the environments we need our robots to go into. So people don't really think about whiskers at all. You probably go home and look at your cat or your gerbil or your rabbit and you think, oh yeah, they're fluffy and have whiskers. But actually what we're doing is trying to understand, well, how do they work and how sensitive are they and what do they use them for? And I think that that's super interesting to find out.
Welcome back. Now, I am grinning from ear to ear because we are in for a treat. We are about to head down into the Royal Society vaults, which is an absolute treasure trove of objects from the history of science. And to guide us through that maze is none other than the Royal Society archivist, Ginny Mills. Hello, Ginny.
Hi, Fran. Nice to meet you.
Really nice to meet you. So could you lead the way? You guide us there.
I've got the key. Let's go downstairs.
Brilliant. So come on. Mind your head on this. It's a bit of a maze through here. Okay, so we're going through. Oh, in we come round the corner. Now there's so many things in this vault. Apparently they have a penguin from Antarctica. They have a lock of Sir Isaac Newton's hair. Apparently they have a perpetual motion machine and even a potato masher that belonged to none other than Ernest Rutherford. Though I am told that he did not use it to split the atom. That's
Pretty
right.
sure that wasn't possible.
Yeah. Okay, so in we go. Oh, look at that door. What? Oh, that is great, Ginny.
We like to keep everything nice and secure. It's 350 years of science history, so we're going to keep it safe.
Oh my word. In we go. Oh my gosh. So many things. Where are we?
Okay.
Oh my, and you've got some stuff out for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got some things here to have a look at. The first thing I've got out for you was inspired actually by one of the exhibitors here at the exhibition. So you may have seen the Sensing Volcanoes
Absolutely,
exhibit, where they're all about using all your sensors to detect the signs of a volcanic eruption. So I thought, and yeah, what's interesting to me about that is actually they're also looking back at historical records to see what they can learn about previous eruptions and the signs from that. So I thought we'd look back at some historical records of volcanic eruptions, and this is, yeah, probably the most famous volcano. Do you reckon Krakatoa?
It's pretty.
I think everyone's heard of
famous.
Krakatoa, right? Because when it erupted famously in 1883, it was one of the biggest volcanic eruptions in history, 4 times more powerful than the biggest ever nuclear device to be detonated.
Gosh.
So it was massive. It had a huge global effect, and the Royal Society wanted to study that. So they've put together a committee which reports not only on the eruption of the volcano, but on the after effects. And it was one of the first examples of a citizen science project, mass observation. They put an advert in the paper asking for people to write in with the things that they'd observed in the aftermath.
I did not know that.
Yeah,
I had no idea.
So 1883, citizen science is going
It's
strong.
yes.
And this is the resulting report, so let's dive into that. So here we go. Here is a engraving from a photo of the early stages of the eruption of Krakatoa in 1883.
Oh my word.
So, yeah. So this is in May, and then the massive eruption event happens in August 1883. And then the effects of that are felt around the world. So obviously it's absolutely catastrophic event. 36,000 people lost their lives.
Gosh.
And we can see here, this is a chart so collected from data from meteorological stations and observatories around the world where they're seeing the after effects. So we've got here.
Go on, I was going to point out actually, because you're not wearing gloves, and I know that some people think that you do have to wear gloves, but I know that it's actually better for the books not to wear the gloves.
You're
isn't
so
it?
right, Fran, you're absolutely right. We're much more dexterous with our hands and more careful if we don't have big clunky gloves on, which might be dirty and as well. So yeah, we'll just be careful and have nice clean hands.
Of course.
So yeah, here we can see this is the passage of tidal waves that went round the world as a result of the eruption. And we can see here a map showing the places at which sounds of the explosion were heard. So that because they've got all these reports coming in from around the world, they know what everyone was experiencing in the aftermath. And so we can see here is the sort of epicenter in Indonesia, and these are marks where the sounds were heard as far away as Australia.
Wow. And this is 1883. This is,
Absolutely.
you know, to even be able to communicate for that
Yeah.
distance is a huge feat.
Yeah, so they were getting letters in, and there was also early days of telegraph, of course, so mass communication coming in.
So much to see.
I just want to really quickly show you as well. There's some beautiful illustrations in here. So it was obviously a really disastrous event, but way around the world in London, the after effects were actually quite beautiful. So we've got here some of the sunsets that was seen as a result of the particles from the volcano
Yes.
travelling around the world. And they actually, this is one of the first observations of the jet stream, because they realised this is how the particles from the volcano were being carried around the world globally. And then you get this amazing kind of diffraction of the light because of the particles in the atmosphere.
Of course you do.
So really disastrous events, some interesting science, and also some beautiful artwork.
Yeah, and you've got some other objects as well?
We have, yeah. So I thought we'd go even further back
Right.
into history and have a look here at one of the oldest items actually in the Royal Society's
No way.
collections.
You spoil us, Ginny.
Yeah, very little package here.
Good thing, small
yeah.
packages.
But here we go. So this is older than the Royal Society itself. So the Royal Society's been around since 1660. This little manuscript is a medieval almanac.
What?
You can see that. So the Royal Society got this in 1668, but by that time it was already like 250, 300 years old. And we can see, so an almanac is basically like a calendar. And if we see, as we fold it out, it's got a lot of information packed in it.
They were busy people.
Yeah. So, and then if I flip it over, you can see all kinds of information on the other side as well. So this is a sort of agricultural almanac. It tells you what different activities you should be doing in the different months of the year. So we've got sort of ploughing and planting seeds, and we've also got the signs of the zodiac on here.
Oh my word. And you've got so many objects to show us. And I know you've got one more, but that is way upstairs. So Roma, back to you, because Ginny and I, we have to go back up all those stairs. So Roma, I don't know, maybe tell them where they can look at more objects about this. But Ginny, guide the way. Let's see if we can make it back upstairs.
While Fran pops upstairs, if you want to have a look at some of the amazing things in the Royal Society